Valley too. Is that we're on now?
Yeah, we're
Okay.
on. All right, we just did a practice run on my personal account, so for those of you who are watching, thanks for letting us know. This one that we're doing right now is going to be way better, so good thing we got that one out of the way. But yeah, like I was saying, it's a weird feeling for us being out here, middle of Red Mountain, just basically talking to a camera, talking to all you guys. It's a lovely day out here. It's around 65, sunny, not a cloud in the sky. Sun setting just towards the Yakima Valley, so it might get a little brighter in our faces as we go along, but we got sunglasses on. We're professionals. We can make it through this. As I was saying before I switched over to our Fidelitas account, we just wanted to say thank you to you guys for, helping us get through these uncertain times. Having to close both tasting rooms was a big deal for us, but we've gotten creative. We're doing stuff like this. We've essentially turned the tasting rooms into curbside pickup wine stations. We've gotten a lot of people coming by to pick up their club allocations, a lot of online sales. So thank you a ton for that. But yeah, we're gonna go ahead and get started on the tasting. We got 3 wines open today. All February releases, all current releases. So these are for sale on the website and at the tasting rooms. All 2017 vintage. We have our 2017 Red Mountain Merlot, our 2017 Optu Red Mountain, and our 2017 Red Mountain Cab. So get started on some Merlot. As you can see, we're trying to practice our social distancing by sitting at opposite ends of the bench. We got our hand sanitizer out on the table, so we're good to go. And I'll let my dad take it away.
So let me just echo what Will said a little bit. Thanks for joining us. This is sort of new to us, but we're going to make the best of it, and kind of looking forward to this. And this will be, we think, at least a weekly occurrence. We'll have something, whether it's future releases, current releases, wines that aren't in the lineup tonight that are already released, maybe a virtual tour of the vineyard this time of year, whatever that might be. We'll keep trying to feed you content. Thanks again for being here. So the first wine tonight is our 2017 Red Mountain Merlot. Merlot holds a very, dear place for me in my heart. This is kind of the wines that we kind of cut our teeth on and really, brought the Washington wine industry forward with red wines in the 90s. I always tell people, there's so much focus on Cabernet Sauvignon now and Syrah and other varieties that really Merlot in the 90s was the wine that put Washington on the world map for red wines. It wasn't Cab, it wasn't Syrah, it wasn't anything else. It was Merlot because we had such great Merlot at really all price points. And I was working with Mike Janik at that time at Chateau Saint Michel, and boy, it was something that we really promoted and really got out there, and it really put us on the map, I think, throughout the country and really the world. So let's just talk a little bit about this wine. 17. I really like the vintage a lot for a couple of reasons. The crop was off a little bit. We had a normal amount of fruit pruned to, but then set came and we lost a little bit of fruit with flowering set, so we didn't get quite as many clusters per vine, and because of that, the crop was off a little bit. But with that comes what I would consider, a better quality and increased quality, and that's what we see from 17. So typically, say we're in a block and we were, shooting for 4 tons per acre, we probably got less than 3.5. So with that, a lower tonnage, but better quality. And that goes for all the wines that we're tasting tonight. Um, Merlot is always the first red variety that we pick, and this vintage kind of came off right after Labor Day. Um, what I see a lot from Washington Merlot is, um, you know, great fruitiness, great varietal characteristic, but at the same time, good concentration once you get it on your palate. So, this, if you're doing this along with us, go ahead and get the aroma, as Gary Vaynerchuk used to say, a little sniffy sniff, and then go ahead and taste that. Yeah, for me, this is just kind of the consummate Washington Merlot. Just great, great concentration on the palate. Nice finish. It's still hanging in there on my palate, and I really can appreciate that. This is really comes from 4 different vineyards on Red Mountain. So with our what we call our Red Mountain lineup, so all the wines usually with the red label, and we make Merlot, Cabernet, Sauvignon. We are making Petit Verdot and Malbec as well. So those 4 varieties. And so this comes from 4 different vineyards on Red Mountain. So Blackwood Canyon, Red Mountain Vineyard, Kiona, and Quintessence Vineyard. Those 4 vineyards make this up. I think some of you have been in and you've picked your shipment up. We've gotten a lot of add-ons for this wine. We should have pretty good inventory for it, but that shouldn't stop you from picking a little bit of it up and getting it going. I know that with the circumstances the way they are right now, it looks like people are going to be depleting their cellars a little bit. This would be a nice filler for those holes in your cellar. So,
yeah, like my dad was saying, so we do this Red Mountain series, and in our vineyard sourcing, so this last harvest, we worked with 9 different vineyard partners, which is pretty insane to think about when we're working with such a small growing area. But for a wine like this, what it allows us to do, like we're sourcing from Kiona's old block of Merlot planted in 1975, and that's going to have all sorts of, earthiness, spice, kind of these not classic Washington Merlot characteristics because they are such old vines. And then we're blending that with something like Quintessence Merlot, which is on the opposite side of the mountain, super hot, intense growing conditions. You're going to get really jammy, fruit-forward, front-of-the-palate characteristics. And so, what we're trying to do is just give us all those different aspects of a certain varietal and be able to blend them together and in turn create a more interesting wine. Another, little tidbit about this wine too is that it is all aged in neutral oak. So most of that flavor you're going to get in your glass is coming from the fruit itself. And because of that, it's going to be a wine that's going to taste pretty delicious right away. And yeah, this wine is really delicious, really fruity. Something you could drink by itself. You could pair it with, I don't know, chicken, some pizza.
Anything grilled, I think.
Yeah.
Including, portobello mushrooms or anything on that spectrum. And Will brings up a good point. I think the goal of one of my goals when I make wine is, so I want to have the wines when we release them to be drinkable, but at the same time, in some vintages they can be ageable, and I think these 17s have really good ageability. And I was talking about it over the weekend with some people, and I think if you look back at our vintages for Fidelitas, and some of you people have wines that go back quite a few vintages, but I would say the ageability on these 17s are right there along with 2012, 2009, and 2007. So keep that in mind. So I'm really excited about these 17 wines for ageability, but they do have that delicious factor right up front. So
hmm Another fun story too. We had the pleasure of we were at the Washington Wine Growing Convention. We were at an auction, and we were actually able to pull a 95 Indian Wells Merlot out of the cellar, and I kind of surprised my dad and brought it to the dinner. One of really the most important wines in his winemaking career, and for such an old wine, it held up beautifully to everything else that we were tasting at the time.
yeah, that was great. If yeah, you can go back to the first vintage we made was '93, and that was a Chateau Saint Michel wine. But '95 was a pretty ageable vintage, if I remember right. And it's great to see that, all those years later, how well it's hanging in there. So it's a different respect for the wine, for sure.
Keep moving along.
Yeah, let's move on.
Want to check your phone to make sure we're still actually talking to people.
I'm getting no messages, so I think
Okay,
we're good.
Hopefully we're still talking to somebody out there. Not just talking to ourselves like crazy people. Alright, up next is our 2017 Optu Red Mountain. I guess I'll give just a very basic, understanding of this wine. Optu, a word we use to kind of signify reserve, means optimum or the best in Latin. So always a variety of vineyards, always a pretty classic Cabernet based Bordeaux style blend. A wine that we've made every single year that we've been in existence since 2000.
We're good.
Okay.
It's kind of crazy because we're sitting here. We don't really have any way to check because there's nobody else here. So somebody sent us a text that said, "All good, rock stars."
Oh, nice. Thanks for the love.
So you want me to go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so Optu, I think, in the history of Fidelitas is important because when I started the winery back in 2000, it was the first wine we ever made. So in the 2000 vintage, we made a wine, what we called at the time Meritage, which means red blend or our best red blend. There's a Meritage Society we joined, and the Napa Valley, and there was people from all over the country, made these wines because a lot of times you could all you could call it if you didn't have a proprietary name, like Optu, was just red wine. Well, what does that mean unless you have a name? So we tried to use the Meritage name and belong to their society so that we could, promote it as our a premium or our best red wine. So since then, I think, if I remember right, in 2004 we changed the name to Optu, and then
it was 2002.
Oh, okay.
This is the weird bottle with the big Optu inside.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we've gone with Optu ever since then. So this release of the 17 is our 18th release of this wine, and so seems kind of odd to me. We've actually brought in both the 18 and the 19 vintage, so we actually have the 20th vintage of Fidelitas in barrel, and I don't know how that happened so quickly, but that kind of puts Will back there at about 9 or 10 years old in our first vintage, so kind of gives you some perspective. So I guess that's about right. Anyway, this wine is always Cabernet based. We've had a couple years where it's been Merlot based, but for the most part it's Cabernet based. So this one is 72% Cab, 16 Merlot, 7% Petit Verdot, and 3% Cabernet Franc. And we go through and put this together and taste individual barrels and make a decision barrel by barrel what makes the blend and what doesn't. So it's typically one of the first wines we put together. The cab part of this is from Canyons and Shaw Cabernet. So we have those that we can use in several different products. We just happen to like them from the 17 and use those as the cab base. The Merlot base is from Quintessence, and that same Kiona block that Will talked about when we were tasting the Merlot, and then a little bit from Red Mountain Vineyard, and then the Petit Verdot from Quintessence, and the Cab Franc is from Quintessence as well. So, and with this wine, we're about 68% new wood, and so a majority of that, 61% of that, is French oak, and the remainder would be American oak. So this one, I think we've oftentimes called this our flagship wine. So if you're going to taste one wine that kind of gives you an idea of what we're about, I think the Optu Red would be a good indicator of what that is.
Mm-hmm. I think it was an eye-opening experience for me this harvest, or this last winter when we were putting our blends together. So a lot of people always ask, what's the blending process like? How on earth would you put a blend like Optu Red together when you have 50 some blocks that you're working with, you have all these different vineyards, all these different varietals. But as I'm following Mitch and my dad go through stuff, we're putting together wines like our Quintessence Cab, our Estate Cab, our Seal Merlot, our what's another one? Our Quintessence Malbec. And when we're doing those and selecting the best barrels for each one of those wines, Mitch and my dad have in the back of their mind these different blends that they're putting together, and they're gonna save one of those barrels to go into the Optu blend. So we make all these wines like, our single varietal, single vineyard series, and out of those, best blocks or barrels that are showing the best for that year, we're saving some of, each one of those and giving ourselves, a lot of good stuff to work with to create a blend like this. So it really is kind of envelops the best of the vintage for everything that Fidelitas does, in one bottle of wine.
Somebody did ask a question about the differences I see between the 16 and 17 Optus. I would say, going back to the ageability, I think the 17s are a little more ageable. They're still delicious and approachable from release, but I think maybe 16 was a little bit more approachable early on, but won't age out as long as the 17s will. Hope that answers the question. I mean, both pretty silky smooth and great concentration on the palate, and lots of different layers when you've got all these different varieties, that are in the wine. You'll notice that we don't use any Malbec. I don't really like Malbec in this blend. We'll put Malbec in other blends that we're going to do in the future. And Will is right with, we just put together the 18s, and it is like a giant puzzle because I think when it all comes down to it, we're making 23 different red wines for Fidelitas, and so you kind of have to see the whole big picture as you're putting them together. So, and the other thing I think that was worth noting with some of these wines is that more and more we're trying to what I call wood ferment. So having the grapes in direct contact with some sort of wood vessel during fermentation. And so we have different methods that we can use. We have open top wood tanks that we can do about 2 tons in. We've got 40 hectoliter closed top French oak wood tanks that we're using now. We've got one 30 hectoliter closed top uh, French oak tank. We've got smaller, what we call roller fermenters, so 500-liter tanks that are kind of on their side. We ferment in those. What we're trying to do ultimately, I think, is try to create all these different what I call components, and then we can go back to them and use those for blending, and it seems to work the best and gives us a lot of, you know, maybe an analogy would be, so if we're cooking and I'm the chef, I'm looking at, this is one main ingredient, but I can add these little spices to it to change it a little bit, and that's what I think we see with all the different wood fermenters that we're using too. So this wine was almost half of it was fermented in different wood fermenters, and that's a big part of what we were doing even then, but even more now into the future. So.
Mm-hmm. And tasting, it's hard to explain too a lot of the times, what the different fermentation styles are doing to the wine, because a lot of times the tastes or the flavors or the textures are subtle. But once you taste enough and you understand what we're doing, it makes a world of difference into making all these wines a little bit more complex. And it obviously makes a huge difference in them, because come harvest time, when we're diverting one lot into 8 different fermentations, it makes 8 times as much work for us. It makes for long days during harvest, but now when we're going back through and tasting through the 18 barrel samples and the 19 barrel samples, gives us a refresher of why we're doing this, because it just, certain blocks or certain clones with a certain type of fermentation just makes all that little difference, and it is well worth it for sure.
Yeah. A couple more questions came through.
All right.
One question was, if and when are we ever going to make 100% Syrah? Never. As many of you know, if you've been around a long time, we did from about 2002, I think 2006 was maybe the last year, we made Syrah. We made varietal Syrah under the Fidelitas label, and we made a Syrah at the end called 8. So it was our 8 best barrels of Syrah. And it was popular, but at the same time, it was up to me. I would probably make Chenin Blanc, Riesling, 2 different Sauvignon Blancs. That's just how winemakers are kind of put together. So with that in mind, we decided to kind of narrow the focus to just Bordeaux varieties. So even at that, we're making a lot of different wines, but they're all Bordeaux varieties. So that means Cab Sauv, Merlot, Cab Franc, Malbec, Petit Verdot. We don't use Carmenere, but that's included. And then on the white side, Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc. So that's kind of what we're sticking to. Another question that somebody had was, what vineyards do I think on Red Mountain showed the best in 17? Certainly our estate vineyard, which if we could flip the camera around, we're looking right out at it. So we have 3 acres planted there initially, which we've been making one wine off of, our Cabernet Sauvignon from the estate vineyard. And then in 2015, we were able to plant 9 more acres, so we have 12 acres total. It just keeps developing as the years go on, and it's showing great promise. I can't say enough about the job that Dick Boucher is done, and Justin over the years. Other ones that I would say, we always go back to Ciel de Cheval. They make up, we make 5 different wines from Ciel de Cheval. It's always been a rock solid, vineyard for us. I always say there's premier Grand Cru wineries or vineyards in Washington. Ciel de Cheval certainly has to be on that list. I don't want to name the rest of them, but certainly Ciel is on that list. The other one that we fall back on a lot shows great promise is Quintessence Vineyard, and we make several wines off of that. The other ones that have become a bigger part of what we do are Heart of the Hill and Kiona. Those seems to be becoming more and more part of what we're doing. And then all the grapes that we buy from Corliss are working out well. And probably in the future, all the vineyards that are affiliated with Dick Shaw and his holdings and Marshall Edwards, farming all those different vineyards for us. So that's just a quick overview maybe of what I think are some of the highlights from 2017. I don't think you can go wrong with just about anything you're growing and getting off of Red Mountain. I think we buy from 10 different vineyards. We find a place for everything that we have, including the Daly Vineyard, which is right next to us, the 5 acres that Roger Gamache has. So I think that should answer it pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Want to move on to the cab?
Moving on. Alrighty. Last up, but certainly not least, is our 2017 Red Mountain Cabernet Sauvignon. It is coming out of mostly Quintessence Vineyard, also our estate vineyard. It is aged in 93% New French oak for 22 months. 70% of this, give or take, is fermented in different types of oak vessels.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the things that we should probably talk a little bit about too is that we buy a lot of fruit from different places on the mountain, but what we've started to do, both with our estate vineyard and some of the other vineyards on the mountain, is we differentiate where we want those blocks to go based upon the clone that we're getting, especially with Cabernet Sauvignon. So we're trying to differentiate wines by clones. So even though we make a Quintessence Cabernet Sauvignon, we have other blocks from Quintessence that are different than the Quintessence vineyard designated wines. So with the vineyard designated wines, we are using the Ontov clones, 169 and 191. And then with wines like this, we're using clone 2 and clone 8. And the same thing off of our estate. So we're trying to focus on clones that we're using for the wines that they're going into, without getting too technical. So again, I mean, a lot of people, consider Cabernet Sauvignon to be the king. People certainly like it. It goes really well with a lot of different cuisine. And many people, there's a dozen wineries or so on Red Mountain, but I've discussed this with many people. There's 4,040 acres on Red Mountain, about 2,500 of it's planted. A big chunk of that is Cabernet, I think around 60%. And people from all over Washington and Oregon and even California come to Red Mountain to buy Cabernet Sauvignon because it is a great standard that we've set on the mountain, especially for Cabernet Sauvignon. And so we make a lot of different Cabernets, this being one from really 2 different vineyards, our estate vineyard, and then from Quintessence. Just worked out that way from this vintage. So if you're doing this at home, take a little sniff of this. Sniffy sniff. And then give it a little taste. It's kind of interesting. The wines are actually warming up.
I know, yeah, it smells again.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, Hope I don't have a sunburn tomorrow.
I'm pretty sure I'm going to.
We didn't quite think we need any sunscreen, but
Yeah.
it's not a bad problem
So
to
it'll
have.
feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah, this Red Mountain Cab for me is always first thing I think of is bright red fruit. It's kind of what we're going for when we put this wine together. So like your strawberry, Bing, cherry characteristics. Still has that classic kind of Red Mountain tannin structure to it. So it's pretty fine grained. A little bit of chalkiness, which you see in a lot of wines that come from this AVA. As far as our Cabernets go, this one tends to be more approachable compared to stuff like Blackwood Canyon or Estate, some of the Quintessence wines, which are actually, aging a little longer now because of that. But yeah, just a super solid wine, a wine that tastes like this will tell you why people from all over the Northwest are coming to Red Mountain to buy fruit from here. You do get a lot of those French oak characteristics in this wine. So it kind of has that toasted coconut, vanilla, herbal characteristics since it is pretty heavily aged in French oak. Again, a lot of that depends on the vintage. Mitch, one of our winemakers, shouts out to Mitch, who's been with us for a really long time.
2010, he worked vintage for us. Yeah.
So he's been buying our barrels for a long time. So, part of us focusing on certain vineyards and focusing on such a small AVA is that we work with a lot of these vineyards year after year, and we're always fine-tuning our processes so we can match different toast levels, barrel producers, with different varietals that come from certain vineyards that really elevate the wine and make it taste more delicious, essentially. But yeah, that's just a super long process. It's kind of hard to explain because a lot of, again, those differences are very, very subtle. It takes a pretty trained palate like, Mitch and my dad have to do that. But, makes a world of difference in the wine, along with the wood fermentation like I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, just to maybe add a little bit to what Will just said, we really try to, that sort of little bite that he gets, a little chalkiness, that's tannin generally, and that's most of what comes from Red Mountain is from the tannin from the skins. And so the real big challenge with Red Mountain Cabernet Sauvignon especially is managing those tannins. So we typically taste at least once a day, usually about 10 o'clock in the morning, and really evaluate when those wines need to come off. I look at it in like 8-hour windows, so if it's something we taste at 10 o'clock, it might need to come off that day. It's that important. And so we really strive to manage those tannins because the decisions we make during that time are what we have to live with through the life of the wine. So we really focus on it, and especially with Red Mountain. If you can't manage tannins, they can get away from you really quickly and really almost become undrinkable. So that's something I really pride myself on, and we always have. And the team really focuses on it, especially during harvest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and trying to explain that is like, so when you're going and you're tasting a fermentation, you have a red fermentation, you have all the skins that rise to the top and sit on top of all the juice that's underneath, and all of the tannin and color and most of the flavor is sitting in those skins. So you're twice a day is how we do it. You're trying to mix up the fermentation to get the desired amount of extraction and flavor and texture out of those skins. It's kind of akin to like if you're doing a French press coffee and you have your coffee sitting at the bottom and and you pour your hot water in there, and let's say you don't wait long enough and you don't get enough extraction out of the coffee grounds, you're going to have a pretty weak tasting coffee. Or let's say you pour it in and you forget about it for 30 minutes and then you push it down and see if it's still going to taste good. The coffee ends up being, too acidic, astringent, overdone. So it's kind of the same way we're treating our fermentations.
Yeah. Good analogy.
During harvest.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have some shout outs. Shouts out. Chainsaw Brewing says Estate Cab is the best. Thank you, Robbie. You make delicious beers. Jess's mom, Christy, thank you for listening in.
I'll do a quick shout out to just everybody that works with us at Fidelitas, and really the crew at the cellar. I don't want to start naming names because I know I'll forget somebody, but without everybody telling our story, I always say this, and working hard at it every day, meeting and greeting the public, we couldn't do this. So difficult times, but just wanted to say, hey, thanks a lot for everything that everybody does for us at all different levels of whatever your role might be within Fidelitas. And a shout out to Allie and Bryce, who were just here and felt kind of strange leaving us alone, but just wanted to give them a quick shout out.
Mm-hmm. We told them to leave so I wouldn't feel so nervous talking in front of the camera. But thank you guys. Someone wants to know which Bordeaux grape is most difficult to manage. So I guess you could say manage in the vineyard and then manage in the cellar.
I would probably say so. Maybe in the cellar. I mean, we do so much Cabernet Sauvignon. That seems like we have a pretty good handle on that. I would say probably Petit Verdot, because Petit Verdot can be so astringent and so tannic. You really have to pay close attention to it and really manage it aggressively. Otherwise, it can go over tannic pretty quickly. So that would be what I would say. As far as the growing side of it,
what does Dick say about the certain clone of Cab we have planted?
Oh,
Clone 6?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clone 6 Cabernet, definitely, because it has a tendency to what we call shatter. So a lot of times you don't get a full flowering cluster, and so it's hard to grow a decent crop from it. But we still grow it because we love the flavor, and that's the difference between us and somebody just growing fruit to sell. We grow fruit to make wine from directly, so we can plant some of those different varietals or clones. Really, it's all Cabernet Sauvignon, but clones. Anything else on that side of it?
No, I'd say in the cellar, knowing the subtle differences between the clones and Cabernet has been something I learned this past harvest. Like you said, certain clones I would taste and be like, wow, this tastes like it's ready to come off, but it's clone 8 and it could actually use it a little bit more extraction.
Yeah.
But we taste something like clone 191. It's like, well, this doesn't have as much tannin as the other ones that we thought about, pressing off. But like you said, if you leave it for another half a day, it's going to get out of control. So you need to actually press it off first in the work order. But I mean, we're not out doing the work in the vineyards every day, but it's pretty easy for us to say. But I'd say we're pretty lucky here on Red Mountain, where we don't have a lot of big problems for growing wine grapes.
Mm-hmm.
You get a lot of vintages that run pretty smoothly because of the type of climate that we have.
Yeah, it's Red Mountain's considered one of the warmer AVAs, and so we're always going to ripen even Cabernet Sauvignon in a cooler vintage for sure.
Mm-hmm. And like, I mean, a day like today is a perfect example. It's March 19th, and it's just
Still
perfect weather.
Yeah. Well, should we wrap it up?
Jess, I have one more question.
Okay.
Jess said, "How did the side of your building get dented?" I didn't even know.
I
It's
know.
A flying umbrella, right?
Yeah, it was a gust of wind picked up an umbrella and slammed up against the building.
Yeah. If you've never been out to Red Mountain or Tri-Cities, it's when the sun starts setting and the temperature starts shifting drastically. It gets real windy.
Yeah, and wind can, unlike today, can be almost a daily occurrence, especially in the spring, and contributes to, I think, the toughness of the skins and maybe to the tannins that we get, that we have to work with. So maybe just to wrap it up a little bit, Will.
Yeah.
Okay. Just again, if you want to order wine, you can always do that. These wines are available. I will say that these aren't the only wines on our current release. We also have our 2018 Optu white wine, which is a Semillon Sauvignon Blanc blend. In addition, in January we released the Red Mountain Malbec, so that's available as well. And then our always reliable 4040, and both those reds are 2017, like these are. So you can just email us at wine@fidelitaswines.com or call in the orders to 509-554-9191, or just call the tasting rooms at either location. And if you're going to come by and do a curbside pickup or even pick up the wine in the tasting room, I think right now it's a good idea to try to contact us beforehand so that we can have your order ready. We're trying to practice as much social distancing as possible, so when you do come by, it needs to be a quick transaction, so in and out fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we're doing free ground shipping on orders of 4 bottles or more, and you can actually request to get your April shipment early if you want. I think probably next week we'll do a same tasting on some of the Seal de Cheval wines that are coming out. So if you want to tune back in for that, I can give you some recommendations for what to choose or add on to your club allocation.
Yeah. So if you have a club allocation you haven't picked up, remember you can add on to that. So a lot of you Optu members, you have 4-bottle shipment. We do have 6-bottle boxes. That a couple more bottles would fit in there nicely. A lot of people are doing that, so thank you for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate it. I think that's about it.
Yeah, I think
thanks again.
Yeah, I think I'll actually turn the camera around too, so you can check out the view for a little bit. But that's a wrap. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your wine. I'll be real interested to see if anyone did the full tasting with us tonight. If you did, good on you. But yeah, thank you.
So if you're still there and you're looking out at this, you're looking almost due west up the Yakima Valley. And if you can see the water tank, that's right in the middle of Benton City. And you can see right below us the State Vineyard, the older vines. That's all Cabernet Sauvignon.